Hi, this is Jeremy Hall. I'm going to run through a quick introduction to the NOS and cover some of the highlights of features, availability, some of the data, the reporting that you can see, some of the functions that are available in it. I'm looking at it through a marketing level account. A marketing account is what most of the ChargePoint salespeople have access to. It's a read-only account. You can't make changes to charging stations. It also does not show you driver information, so there's no privacy issues with it, but it does show customer information. So in that sense, be mindful of what information you're sharing with other people. We don't want to give away information that may be sensitive, even if it's not necessarily considered private. So what you're looking at here is the dashboard. The dashboard is the landing page for whoever owns or has access to a ChargePoint station. Our user experience team spent a lot of time talking to station owners, station operators about what information they felt was useful. And so this is the result of that. It's still undergoing development and tweaks, but this is a great first start and is designed to really give relevant information to station owners in a quick and easily digestible format. This page is tablet and smartphone friendly, so you don't have to be sitting at a computer to access it. It's formatted in a tile structure, so each of these squares, I can click on the icon on it and it flips it over and gives me some helpful information about each tile. In this case, I'm looking at the station usage tile, and this one's got a couple of different choices on it. I can look at it by category, which means that we categorize charging stations based on how many hours of the day they're in use. Stations that are used less than 3 hours a day on average, Monday through Friday in the last 30 days, we classify as lightly used. Stations that are in use on average 3 to 6 hours are moderately used. Stations in use more than 6 hours a day on average are classified as heavily utilized. So if I'm an individual station owner and I see all my stations are in the heavy side of things, heavily utilized side of things, then that's a prompt for me to maybe take a look at what policies I've got applied on the stations. Maybe I want to implement or change my pricing policy or do other things, or maybe just at capacity need to add more charging stations. The other interesting aspect about this tile is the time of day function. I can click on this and I can see when the charging stations are in use during the day. And so this is more of a planning tool from a driver perspective. We share this exact information in this graph in our mobile app for the drivers. And so they can look ahead and say, you know, I'm going to be at this location or in this area in 2 hours. So they can look at the predicted utilization of the station at that time and kind of judge whether that's a good station to go to, whether it's likely to be in use or not, or maybe they need to look for a different station that's less likely to be used. We do obviously show real-time status and availability of charging stations, but if I'm thinking 2 hours ahead, then how the station is right now doesn't really help that much. So this is a pretty cool function. Stepping back a tile, we show driver messages. Drivers have the ability to leave feedback or tips about charging stations, and this gets reflected in the ChargePoint station owner dashboard. So if I click on this driver tip, I can see what station they're talking about. So if I'm a station owner, I got stations kind of all over the place, I can see which one they're talking about. I can see what they say. In this case, it was powered off. Maybe that was intentional and the station owner already noticed about that, or maybe he didn't realize that it was powered off and he can go, flip the brake or do whatever he needs to rectify that. If I scroll down a little bit here, I see the real-time station status. You can see we've got over 58,000 ports right now. This includes the residential number, so this will not match directly with what the posted numbers are on the ChargePoint website, which does not include the residential stations. I can also see here what the real-time status is. So we've got almost 15,000 ports that are in use right now. We've got another 38,000 that are available to be used, and then we've got other stations that are in some type of fault condition, or we simply can't reach them because they've been powered off or we've lost network connectivity with them. Doesn't necessarily mean that the station actually has a fault, it just means that we can't communicate with that station. In the center here, we have real-time power, and so I can see what the current load is on the system. So right now, all of our stations are collectively outputting just a little over 32 megawatts of power, which sounds pretty significant, and it is. But if we had all of our stations in use at the same time at full power, we could be doing 375 megawatts of power. So this is an interesting chart for facilities people to keep an eye on, or people that are, paying the utility bill and are concerned about demand charges and things like that. This gets updated automatically every few seconds. Unique drivers, every individual driver, or more accurately, every individual charge point driver that uses a station gets treated or tracked as a unique driver. So if I'm a workplace, I can look at this report and see how many different EV drivers I have in the parking lot. It doesn't tell me how often they're using the stations or how much energy they're taking or whatever. It just tells me that I've got this number of different EV drivers using the stations. A retailer would be interested in this, for example, to monitor if they're getting new drivers using the stations, which is what you want to see. I want to know that I've got more and more people coming to my store driving an EV. Number of sessions, literally every time somebody plugs into a station, that's what we count as a session. Average session length is one of the more interesting tiles. This tracks how long, on average, a driver stays connected, physically connected to a station when they plug in. In this case, across our entire network of stations, across every vertical, it's 5 hours and 18 minutes. Now keep in mind that includes the home chargers, the fleet chargers, the DC fast chargers and everything. So this is going to be a very broad average. And in a minute, I'm going to zoom into one particular organization where it'll make a little more, have a little more context behind it. We also break out that from active charging time versus idle time. Active charging time, the car's actively charging, the battery's not full yet, so he's pulling some level of electricity. Idle time is the car is now fully charged and he just happens to be sitting there not doing anything. Basic financial tile, if you've got a fee on the station, this is going to tell you how much revenue you've collected at the charging station. And we give you the ability to measure that against estimated utility cost per kilowatt hour. So there's a drop down here. So I can set what my cost of electricity is. This does not account for time of day based pricing, which in many cases varies throughout the day, and this does not account for delivery charges or demand charges or whatever, but it is a good way to estimate what your revenue is versus what your basic cost of electricity is. If your goal as a station owner is to break even on electricity, then this is a useful tool to look at. And then energy, how much electricity is dispensed by your charging stations, and then kind of the environmental impact by enabling drivers to drive electric. So that's a quick overview of the dashboard. I'm going to use the filtering capabilities at the top right. And here you can see that you can view as a particular organization, or I can load specific organizations. If I wanted to look at one particular customer, say Target or Google or Royal Farms, I would use the view as organization function, and then that would specifically change my data set, my station visibility and stuff to those stations only. If I wanted to look at more than one organization, say I was looking at a report and I wanted to aggregate a bunch of retailers together, I could load Target, I could load Whole Foods, I could load in Royal Farms, I could load in co-ops and combine all of their data sets into one. So I'm looking at more of an aggregated view of a retailer segment in that case. So keep that in mind depending on what you want to do. I typically use view as organization, but in some cases, if I do want to aggregate multiple retailers and multiple workplaces together, I would do the other one. So I'm going to look at Target right now, just as an example. And so what you do is you start typing in the name, and it'll eventually give you a match list down here. In this case, Target is fairly unique, and I've only got one choice to choose from. So I have to click on the name, and you'll see that it is now selected Target, and I'll hit apply. Now my dashboard and everything else is going to be specific to the Target charging stations. And here I can see the station messages are now filtered for Target. My station usage throughout the day is based on the Target retail stores. I've got 92 ports available now, not 58,000. My power has changed, my unique drivers, all of that stuff. The average session length is now reflective of the Target charging station. So here I can see what's more appropriate for a retailer. 1 hour and 8 minute connection time, of that 59 minutes charging and 8 minutes idle. That's exactly what we want to see as a retailer. We don't want people squatting at the stations all day long. We don't want misuse of the stations. We don't want people plugging in all night long doing stuff. So this data shows that the stations are being used in a way that Target specifically wants them to be used. They don't allow overnight charging on the stations. They use our access control by time of day to effectively make the stations unusable outside of store hours. So that's why you see in this station usage thing that there is no overnight charging. It's all during business hours. So now when I go further into the system and look at the Manage Stations tab, I will see a list of all of the charging stations that are owned by Target. And I can see the station name, I can see the MAC address, I can see where they're located, I see on the map where they're located, I can click on those bubbles and zoom in, and it eventually take me down to ground level. I can change it to satellite view if I want to get a better picture of what the ground looks like and where the stations are. I can zoom in, I can zoom out, all that kind of stuff. I can scroll across a little slider bar down here and look at more detailed information about every single charging station. The real-time status is reflected in here. This does not get auto refresh, so it may go stale over time if you stay on this page quite a bit. I can look at the policies that are applied on the stations. In this case, these two stations are open all the time. These stations have the time of use policy that means they're only available during store hours. And I can look at the pricing policy. I can look at all the a bunch of relevant information about these charging stations going all the way across here. I can look at the status view, and this gives me the ability to see what the operational state is of the charging stations. Here I can see that there are two stations in need of service, and I can expand on that and see that one is powered off and one has a hardware fault. I can see that there are some on the watch list, which means they've been unreachable for a brief period of time. I can see 20 are in use and 34 are available. Here's where I would be able to view or set pricing information as a station owner. Here I can only view what the pricing policies are. I'm not going to get into the details of how the pricing rules and policies are structured, but here you can see that Target has applied across their 41 stations, 92 ports, because they deployed dual port stations, a common policy. So everybody pays the same fee at the station. In this case, it's 2 hours free and then $2 every hour afterwards. I can look at access control. And for the retail locations, they've got access control applied that says people can only use the charging stations during store hours. And you can see what stations that's applied to. They've got a couple of stations that don't have it, but generally speaking, that's what they have. So here's where you can upload videos to the charging stations. So Target's got a number of videos uploaded. In this case, they've got an August 2017 branded animation video playing on all of their stations, and they rotate this over time and throw different ads on it. That's pretty much the relevant thing. Station messages, you can apply a message to the video screen of the stations. It's a little hard to read, so generally speaking, a video ad's more appropriate. Scheduled charging is primarily a fleet application where the fleet vehicles may be out and about during the day and then come back to home at random times in the afternoon or evening. And so this feature is designed to minimize the cost of charging those fleet vehicles. Typically what happens is the vehicles get returned at the end of the day and they sit there overnight plugged in and charging, and somebody picks them up again at some point the next day. So there's lots of time for those vehicles to charge. There's no need to charge them at full rate as soon as they return and are plugged in. If I come back and plug my car in at 3 in the afternoon, I'm likely going to be paying higher cost of electricity than if I plug the car in at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. So the scheduled charging is a way to push that charging activity to the off-peak hours automatically without having to have somebody go out to the cars and plug them in physically at that time. Our home stations have a similar feature in them as well, so that when you plug your car in, it just kind of sits there idle until you get into an off-peak time period. From a reporting perspective, we've got a number of standard reports that are available with our service plans, the data plan, the power plan, and the commercial plan. And the enterprise plan all have access to this. The enterprise plan has some additional features and reports available as well. I'm not going to cover every single report here, but I'll cover some of the highlights. The energy report shows how much electricity was output by your stations over time. I can change the time frame that I'm looking at to whatever I like. I can choose a predefined thing, let's just say this year, and hit update. So now it's going to expand the time frame from January 1st until today. Each blue bar represents a single 24-hour period. If I wanted to change that and look at energy on a weekly basis, I would click on the zoom bar at the bottom. I can click on the month bar, and it will reaggregate it to a monthly basis. I could look at it on a yearly basis if I want to go back further in time. This report also has the ability to show energy by object. And so rather than showing an aggregated view of all of the energy, I can switch it to an object-based view. So here I can decide to show it based on the organization overall. This would be useful for, say, distributed organizations where maybe they've got each campus is set up as a different organization in the system, but you wanted to report on them all together. Maybe Adobe would be a good example of this. They've got charging stations at their San Jose office, their San Francisco office, their Ottawa office, I think 2 or 3 other locations as well, and they're all defined as different organizations in the system. So as an Adobe network manager, I can view all of those different organizations, and I can look at the energy used by organization through this means. I can use custom groups or radio groups to further define it, or I can go all the way down to the station level, and it's going to show me which stations have been used more than other stations based on energy output, and it sorts it from most used to least used. This is exportable. All of these reports are exportable to an image or to a CSV file that can be brought into Excel or another spreadsheet or database for further manipulation. So in this case, if I exported this chart itself to a CSV file, I would get data point for every station here. I would get the station name and then the total electricity or the energy that it had output during the time frame. A couple other reports that I'll talk about. Peak daily occupancy. I'm going to shorten the time frame to the last 7 days. Excuse me. This might take a couple of minutes, but the way I like to explain this report is if you had 10 charging stations or ports in your parking lot and you were to keep an eye on it all day long, and you watched for how many drivers were using them at any point in time, your peak occupancy. So if I looked at it, at some point in time, all 10 ports were in use. The occupancy at that time would be 100%. If, as I was watching all that throughout the day, the most I ever saw was, say, 8 of the 10 ports in use, the occupancy at that time would be 80%, 8 of the 10 stations. And so we track that occupancy throughout the day, and we record what the peak occupancy was. So if at some point in time all the charging stations were in use, during the day, we would tag that as 100% utilized. If at some point in time 8 stations were in use, and that was the most that the occupancy hit during the day, we would track the peak occupancy as 80% on that day. So here you can see that the target stores, and again, I'm looking at a broad set of stations here, really only hit 30 to 40% in most cases, maybe a little more than 40%. So across the board, there's free ports available at any point in time. If I was to filter into a specific location using one of the filters here at the bottom, there's a number of different things. Let's pick state or province, and let's look at California and hit apply. It's going to change my view to show me only the stations in California, and it's going to show me what the peak occupancy is for California. So in this case, it's a little bit higher than average, poking towards 50%, 44% in this case. If I was to look at Hawaii, we'll see what that looks like. Oh wow, this is even higher. So for the Hawaii stations, they're more likely to be in use than not. We're over 50% peak occupancy in these cases. But what this is saying that in this data set, at no point in time is there no station available. So there's no reason to add new stations to the group of stations because there's never not one available. So this is an interesting report to show. Let me jump to the session length histogram now. Again, I'll keep it short for the last 7 days. I'm back to the full data set. And here I can see the distribution of session length times. In this case, the average session length is 1 hour and 7 minutes across the board, but there's a bit of a variance here. I can change what my granularity is. I can look at it in 15-minute intervals if I wanted to. And I can see that most of the sessions happen to be 15 minutes, around 15 minutes or so. And I've got quite a few sessions that are still in that 30 to 45 to 1 hour range. And then I get up to that 2 hour mark. If you remember the pricing rule that's applied at these stations, they get 2 hours of free charging, and then they have to pay $2 an hour after that. So by the time we get to this 2 hour mark, you can see the cumulative number is 88.6%. That means almost 90% of the sessions last for 2 hours or less. Now, there's still a few sessions that last for longer than that. And that's probably because they also have a few workplace stations in Minnesota that don't have that same pricing policy. So it's likely that these ones out here are the workplace stations, and the ones over here are the retailer stations. One of the interesting things about this report is you can zoom in, and you do that by clicking and dragging your mouse across to the area that you want to focus on. And so you can see that the graph now is showing me only the area that I'm interested in, so I get a little bit better visual of the report. Next report that I'll show you is the average utilization report. This you have a few more options on it. You can define what hours of the day you're interested in doing. You can look at weekdays, weekends, or both, and I can separate out level 2 from DC stations. So if I'm a retailer, I'm probably interested in what the business hours are of the store. And so Target's usually open a little earlier in the day. So let's say 8 a.m. to I don't know, 10 p.m. I think some might be 24 hours, but some are not. Actually, no, I don't think any are 24 hours. But let's do 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. on, let's just do weekdays to start, and I will update it here. And it will crunch some numbers. And here I can see that it's showing me the most used group of charging stations here. So if I hover over the bar here, it's telling me that from an organization perspective, there's 92 total ports and there's 20 radio groups. And the radio group with the highest utilization is in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, with 4 ports, and their average utilization is a little more than 54%. The 54% is based on what I've defined up here. So 54% of the hours that I'm interested in, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. So the ports in this case are in use a little bit more than half of the time within this time frame. If I click on this box here or chart, it expands that and it shows me all of the radio groups sorted from most used to least used. So here I can hover over this and I can see that same Brooklyn Park utilization, and then I can go to the next one, and it's a different radio group at Brooklyn Park, is still pretty heavily utilized but not quite as much, and I can go to next one at San Mateo and down on the list. So I can track how many hours of the day the stations are in use, and I can monitor that over time, and I can look at it over different time frames as well. Maybe I want to look at the weekdays versus weekends separately. So now I've chosen weekends on the top, and it's going to show me a different one. So now it's saying that on weekends from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., the San Mateo Target store has the most utilization. And if I click on that, it's going to show me what all of them are. So I've got the San Mateo Target, the Target Oahu is the next one in line, the Fremont Target, all the way down. Now, the other cool thing is I can click on one of these and it shows me on the map exactly where those stations are. I can click on this one and it's going to show me in Kona, Hawaii, where those charging stations are. So it's a quick, easy way to visualize those charging stations. The last one I'm going to show here is the session details table. And this is the detailed transaction record of everything that happens at a charging station from a charging event perspective. I can see when a driver plugged in, which station they plugged into, when they disconnected, how long they were physically plugged in. And if I scroll over, I'll see how long they're actively charging. So in this case, the driver was plugged in for 2 hours and 59 minutes, and he was actively charging for pretty much all of that time. If I scroll down, I can see this driver plugged in for a little over 4 hours, but only actively charged for a little over 2. I can see the energy, the estimated greenhouse gas savings. I can see what type of connector they used. In this case, they're all level 2, but if it was a DC fast charger, I would see CHAdeMO versus CCS, etc. And I can see where the station was and a whole bunch of different things. One of the interesting things that the marketing level login gives is the vehicle information. This data is not exposed to our customers, so be careful if you're talking to them about what data set they see. We don't expose this for a number of reasons, but internal ChargePoint employees in many cases get to see this because we want to do some analysis and stuff like that on it. So here I can see that it was a Mercedes-Benz B-Class, a Chevy Volt, a BMW i3, and so on down the list. And I can export this table, and I can do pivot tables, and I can do all kinds of cool stuff in Excel. So that's it for the basic ChargePoint NOS overview. Thank you for paying attention.